This story is titled, Daughter Proudly Cheated with Her Sister's Husband, Now Begs Us to Take Her In After He Cheated and Dumped Her. Hey everyone, we put a lot of time and effort into finding these stories to keep bringing you the best content. If you enjoy what we do, it would mean the world if you hit that subscribe button. Your support really makes all the difference and keeps this journey going strong. Thanks so much for being here with me. Now let's start the video. OP starts by saying, Hey Reddit, I honestly never thought I'd be sharing something like this here, but I don't even know where else to turn. My family has been through so much over the last few years, and I still can't fully wrap my head around everything that's happened. I just need to get this out because maybe writing it all down will help me process it better. Also, I could really use some advice, or even just an outside perspective. So, I guess I'll start from the beginning. I'm a 48-year-old mom of 3 kids. Sarah, 27 female, Emily, 25 female, and Alex, 21 male. My husband, 53 male, and I have been married for nearly 3 decades. Up until a few years ago, I really thought we had a solid, happy family. Sure, we had our ups and downs, but who doesn't? Looking back now, I can't believe how naive I was. This all started about 3 years ago. At the time, Sarah was married to Jake, then 28 male. They'd been together for years and seemed like one of those couples who had it all figured out. I loved Jake like my own son, and Sarah seemed genuinely happy with him. But everything fell apart in the worst way possible. Around that time, Sarah went through something incredibly traumatic. I don't want to share too many details because it's her story, not mine. But let's just say it was the kind of thing that changes a person forever. She was struggling to cope, and I could see it in everything she did. Her eyes were always red from crying. She jumped at every little noise, and she started isolating herself from everyone, even her family. It was heartbreaking to watch, and I felt so helpless. Then, as if that wasn't bad enough, we found out that Jake had been cheating on Sarah with her younger sister Emily. I can't even describe the moment I found out. It felt like someone had ripped my heart out of my chest and stomped on it. The worst part was that I didn't even hear it from Emily or Jake. I found out from Sarah after she caught them. Sarah was completely crushed. I've never seen her like that in my entire life, and I pray to God I never do again. When I confronted Emily about it, I expected tears, apologies, maybe even an attempt at explaining herself. But instead, she just shrugged and said, well, someone had to take care of Jake since Sarah wasn't. I was stunned. She said it so casually, like it was no big deal. I couldn't believe my own daughter was capable of saying something so cruel. I was so angry that I had to leave the room before I did something I'd regret. That was the moment I decided I couldn't have Emily in my life. Not until she understood the gravity of what she'd done. I told her, in no uncertain terms, that she needed to stay away from me, her father, and most importantly, Sarah. At first, she tried to argue, but when she saw I wasn't budging, she started screaming. She said things like, "You're choosing Sarah over me, and you're such a hypocrite." But honestly, her words didn't mean anything to me in that moment. I was done. Meanwhile, Sarah was barely holding on. She blamed herself for everything. Jake's infidelity, the fallout with her sister, even the traumatic event that had happened to her. No matter how many times I told her it wasn't her fault, she just couldn't believe it. She kept saying, maybe if I had been a better wife, this wouldn't have happened. It broke my heart every time. We ended up getting Sarah into therapy, which was probably the best decision we made during that time. At first, she was hesitant to go, but over time, she started to open up. Therapy didn't fix everything overnight, but it gave her the tools she needed to start healing. Slowly but surely, she began to find herself again. She even started going out with friends and pursuing hobbies she'd given up on. Seeing her smile again, after everything she'd been through, was like a breath of fresh air. Emily, on the other hand, didn't seem to have any remorse for what she'd done. After Sarah and Jake finalized their divorce, Emily and Jake went public with their relationship. They didn't even try to be discreet about it. They posted pictures together on social media, went on trips, and acted like nothing had happened. It was infuriating to say the least. Then came the ultimate slap in the face. Emily and Jake announced their engagement. I found out through Alex, who called me in disbelief after seeing their engagement party photos online. Emily had the audacity to ask me and my husband to come to the wedding. I was appalled. I told her straight up that I couldn't support their relationship and that I wouldn't be attending. My husband felt the same way. Emily tried to argue, saying things like, "You're being so unfair," and "Jake loves me, Mom. Why can't you just be happy for me?" But I wasn't having it. I also gave her a warning, which I still stand by to this day. If Jake cheated with you, he'll cheat on you. It's only a matter of time. She didn't take that well, But honestly, I didn't care. My priority was, and still is, protecting Sarah. Looking back on that time, I can't believe how much our family changed in such a short period. What once felt like a strong, unbreakable bond was completely shattered. I barely recognized Emily anymore, and my relationship with her hasn't been the same since. As much as it hurts to say, I don't think I'll ever be able to forgive her for what she did to Sarah. At the same time, she's still my daughter, and part of me wants to believe she can change, but I'm not holding my breath. After cutting contact with Emily following the fallout, I honestly thought things couldn't get worse. I mean, how much more damage could she do, right? I underestimated just how deep her selfishness ran. For a while, she stayed quiet. She didn't reach out to me or her dad, which was honestly a relief. But life didn't stay peaceful for long. One day, Alex, my youngest, came storming into the house with his phone in his hand. I'll never forget the look on his face. It was this mix of anger and disbelief. He handed me his phone and said, "Have you seen this?" I looked down and saw a photo of Emily and Jake, arms wrapped around each other, all smiles. But that wasn't the worst part. In the caption, Emily had written, "He put a ring on it. Forever love." I couldn't believe what I was seeing. They were engaged. My daughter was engaged to the man who had not only betrayed her sister, but also contributed to the lowest point in her life. It felt like a slap in the face. It wasn't just the engagement itself. It was the way they flaunted it. They didn't seem to care how it would affect anyone else, especially Sarah. I wasn't sure how to break the news to Sarah. She was finally starting to make progress in therapy, and I didn't want to undo all that by bringing this up. But at the same time, I knew she'd find out eventually, and I didn't want her to feel blindsided. So, I sat her down and told her as gently as I could. Her face fell immediately, and she just sat there in silence for what felt like an eternity. Then, she said, "I knew they were together, but I didn't think they'd actually take it this far." She didn't cry, but I could see the hurt in her eyes. It was like she'd been stabbed all over again. After that, I decided to reach out to Emily. I hadn't spoken to her in months, but I felt like I needed to say something. If not for my sake, then for Sarah's. I called her, and surprisingly, she picked up. I told her how hurtful her actions were, and that getting engaged to Jake was just pouring salt in the wound. Her response? "Mom, you just don't understand. Jake and I are in love. What Sarah and Jake had is over. Why can't you just be happy for me?" Happy for her? Couldn't believe she had the nerve to say that. I told her in no uncertain terms that I would not support her relationship with Jake. I also warned her, again, that if Jake could cheat on Sarah, he could just as easily cheat on her. She laughed it off, saying, "Jake's a different person with me. You'll see." That was the last time we spoke for a while. Then came the engagement party. No, I didn't go. Let's get that out of the way. But Alex did. He said he didn't want to support them, but he was curious to see how it would all play out. Apparently, the party was everything you'd expect from Emily and Jake. Flashy, over the top, and completely devoid of self-awareness. They even had the audacity to post photos on social media with captions like, "True love wins," and "Can't wait to spend forever with you." The comments section was a mess. Some people congratulated them, but others called them out for their terrible behavior. It was a circus. Alex also told me that some of the extended family showed up, which was surprising. I later found out that most of them didn't know the full story. They thought Emily and Jake had gotten together after the divorce, not during Sarah and Jake's marriage. When the truth came out, a lot of them were furious. One of my sisters even called me to apologize for attending, saying she had no idea what Emily had done. Meanwhile, Sarah was trying her best to move on. She stopped following Emily and Jake on social media, and she asked us not to mention them around her. I respected her wishes, but it was hard to avoid the topic entirely, especially with Alex constantly updating me on their antics. He was just as angry as I was, if not more. He kept saying things like, "How can she not see how wrong this is? And Jake's such a scumbag. I don't know how she can stand him." As for my husband, he stayed quiet for the most part. He's always been the calm, steady one in our relationship, but I could tell he was just as upset as I was. One night, after a particularly rough day, he sat down next to me and said, "I don't know where we went wrong with Emily. I thought we raised her better than this." That hit me hard. I'd been asking myself the same question, but hearing him say it out loud made it feel so much more real. The engagement eventually turned into wedding planning. I tried to tune it out as much as possible, but Emily kept finding ways to involve me, even though I'd made my stance clear. She'd send me text messages with things like, "Mom, do you want to help me pick out a dress?" Or, "We're looking at venues next weekend. Want to come?" Each time I replied with a polite but firm no. I thought she'd get the hint, but she didn't. Then, out of nowhere, she called me one evening. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. She sounded so excited and said, "Mom, I really want you and Dad to walk me down the aisle. It would mean so much to me." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told her, as gently as I could, that we couldn't support her wedding. Not because we didn't love her, but because of everything that had happened. She started crying and said, "You're choosing Sarah over me again. Why can't you just let this go?" That broke my heart, but I stood my ground. I told her this wasn't about choosing one daughter over the other. It was about doing what was right. That conversation ended with her hanging up on me, and I haven't heard from her since. Honestly, I'm okay with that. As much as I miss the Emily I used to know, I can't let her actions go unchecked. She needs to understand that her choices have consequences. After the fiasco with the engagement party and Emily's increasingly tone-deaf attempts to involve us in her wedding plans, things went eerily quiet. I didn't hear from Emily, Jake, or even much from the extended family. To be honest, I thought maybe they had finally accepted our stance and decided to move on without us. It was bittersweet. On one hand, it felt like a relief not to deal with the drama, but on the other, I couldn't shake the sadness of knowing how fractured our family had become. Sarah was doing her best to heal, but I could see how much this situation was still weighing on her. She had started setting boundaries with the family, avoiding gatherings where she thought Emily or Jake might show up. One time, we had a small family barbecue planned, and she specifically asked, "Are they going to be there?" I assured her they weren't invited, but the fact that she even had to ask broke my heart. She should have been able to feel safe with her own family, but instead, she was constantly on edge. One night, Sarah and I were sitting in the living room, and she opened up to me about how she really felt. "Mom, I don't think I'll ever forgive her," she said, staring at the floor. "Not just for Jake, but for the way she treated me when I was at my lowest. She didn't just betray me, she enjoyed it. She didn't care what it did to me." Hearing her say that was like a knife to the heart. I didn't know how to respond because honestly, I couldn't blame her. Emily's actions had been so callous, and she had shown no remorse. Around this time, Alex started pulling away from Emily too. He had been furious about her actions from the start, but he'd still kept in touch with her, mostly out of a sense of obligation. But one day he came to me and said, "Mom, I can't do it anymore. Every time I talk to her, she acts like she's the victim in all this. I'm sick of it." He stopped answering her calls and unfollowed her on social media. I think that was the wake-up call Emily needed, because not long after, she started reaching out to me again. At first, it was just small things. Texts asking how we were doing or updates about the wedding. I kept my responses short and polite, but didn't engage much. Then, out of nowhere, she sent me this long message about how much she missed our family and how hard it was to plan a wedding without her parents' support. She even said something along the lines of, "I know I've made mistakes, but can't we just move forward?" I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Finally, I wrote back, "Emily, I love you, but you need to take responsibility for the pain you've caused before we can even think about moving forward." Her reply was immediate and defensive. She said she had nothing to apologize for because she and Jake were meant to be, and that if Sarah couldn't handle that, it wasn't her fault. I didn't respond after that. I didn't see the point. A few months passed, and Emily and Jake got married in what I assume was a beautiful ceremony, though I wouldn't know because, of course, we didn't attend. I heard through the grapevine that some family members who did go felt awkward the entire time. One of my cousins even texted me afterward to say, "It felt like everyone was pretending not to notice the elephant in the room. I wish I'd stayed home." After the wedding, things went quiet again. Emily didn't contact us, and honestly, I thought maybe she'd finally moved on. Sarah started to seem a little lighter, too. She was going out more, laughing more. It was like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. I started to feel hopeful that maybe, just maybe, we could put this whole mess behind us. But then, out of nowhere, Emily showed up at my doorstep. It was a rainy evening, and I was in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner when I heard a frantic knock at the door. At first, I thought it might be a neighbor needing something, but when I opened the door, there was Emily, soaking wet, crying, and holding a baby and a toddler. I was so shocked I didn't know what to say. She just stood there, looking completely defeated, and finally said, "Mom, I need your help." I let her in, of course. As angry as I was at her, I couldn't turn her away, not with the kids there. She sat on the couch, still sobbing, while I got her a towel and tried to calm her down. Once she finally caught her breath, she started telling me what had happened. Apparently, Jake had been emotionally and verbally abusive for months. He'd been controlling, constantly putting her down, and even had another woman on the side. "He has a whole other family, Mom," she said through tears. "I can't go back there. I just can't. Hearing her say that stirred up so many emotions. On one hand, I felt for her. No one deserves to be treated like that. But on the other hand, I couldn't help thinking, you chose this. You knew who he was, and you still chose him over your sister, over your family. It was a hard thing to reconcile. Emily begged me to let her and the kids stay with us. She said she had nowhere else to go and didn't know what to do. I told her I needed time to think about it. I didn't want to make any rash decisions, especially knowing how this might affect Sarah. After everything Sarah had been through, I couldn't risk doing anything that might set her back. That night, I told my husband what had happened. He was just as conflicted as I was. We can't just turn her away, he said, but we also can't ignore how much she's hurt Sarah. It felt like we were stuck between a rock and a hard place. No matter what we decided, someone was going to get hurt. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept replaying everything in my head: Emily's betrayal, Sarah's pain, Jake's predictably awful behavior. I didn't know what the right thing to do was, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever decision I made, it had to be for the good of the family as a whole. Not just for Emily, not just for Sarah, but for everyone. After Emily showed up at my door with her kids, my life was thrown into chaos yet again. I spent most of that first night sitting up in the living room, staring at her sleeping on the couch with her baby in her arms. The toddler was curled up on the floor beside her, clutching a worn-out stuffed animal. It was such a stark contrast to the confident, even smug version of Emily I'd seen over the past few years. She looked fragile, broken even, and I didn't know what to make of it. When morning came, I decided I couldn't put off the conversation any longer. I gently woke her up and handed her a cup of coffee. "We need to talk," I said. She nodded, looking like she knew it was coming. I asked her to tell me everything: how she ended up in this situation, why she came to me, what she wanted me to do. Emily told me that things with Jake had started falling apart not long after they got married. She said he'd become controlling, monitoring her phone and criticizing her constantly. She tried to brush it off at first, thinking it was just stress or maybe some growing pains as they adjusted to married life. But then he started disappearing for long stretches of time, and she began to suspect he was cheating. It wasn't until she found texts and photos on his phone quietly that her suspicions letting her get it all out. Part of me wanted to say, for over a year, "What did you expect?" she said, but I bit my tongue. I knew she didn't need a lecture. Not yet, anyway. When she finished, she looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "I know I've messed up, Mom, but I don't have anyone else to turn to." That's when the guilt started creeping in. As much as I hated what Emily had done, she was still my daughter. And those kids, my grandkids, were innocent in all of this. I told her I needed time to think about it, and I wasn't making any promises. She nodded and said she understood, but I could tell she was disappointed. I decided the next step was to talk to Sarah. I couldn't make a decision about Emily without considering how it would affect her. That afternoon, I called her and asked if she could come over. She sounded hesitant, but agreed. When Sarah arrived, she immediately noticed Emily's things in the hallway. Her face fell, and I knew this conversation was going to be harder than I thought. We sat down at the kitchen table, and I explained the situation as calmly as I could. I told her about Emily's troubles with Jake, and how she'd shown up at our door with nowhere else to go. Sarah listened quietly, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she took a deep breath and said, "Mom, I get that you want to help her, but you have to understand. I can't be around her. Not after everything she's done. I've worked so hard to move on, and I can't go backward." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I knew she was right. Emily's presence in our home would reopen wounds that Sarah had spent years trying to heal. But at the same time, I couldn't just abandon Emily and her kids. I felt like I was being forced to choose between my daughters, and it was tearing me apart. My husband was just as conflicted as I was. That evening, we sat down to talk about it, and he said, "I don't think there's a right answer here. No matter what we do, someone's going to get hurt." He suggested we look into alternative solutions, maybe helping Emily find a place to stay nearby so she wouldn't be in the house, but would still have support. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it felt like the best compromise we could come up with. The next day, I told Emily about our decision. I explained that while we couldn't have her staying with us, we would help her find an apartment and cover the first month's rent. I also offered to help with daycare for the kids so she could look for a job. I expected her to be grateful, or at least understanding, but instead, she got angry. "This is my family," she yelled. "How can you just turn me away like this? After everything I've been through?" I tried to stay calm and explained that it wasn't about turning her away. It was about protecting Sarah's mental health, but she wasn't having it. "Sarah needs to get over it," she snapped. "It's been years. How much longer are you going to coddle her?" That was the moment my husband lost his temper. He stood up and said, "Don't you dare talk about your sister like that. Do you even realize how much pain you've caused her? You're lucky we're even willing to help you at all." Emily burst into tears and ran out of the room, leaving me and my husband sitting there in silence. Over the next few days, I tried to smooth things over with Emily. I found a one-bedroom apartment for her and helped her get in touch with a lawyer to start the divorce process. But she remained distant and cold, barely speaking to me unless it was absolutely necessary. It was clear she felt betrayed, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. She was finally facing the consequences of her actions, and while it was painful to watch, I knew it was necessary. As for Sarah, I made a point to check in with her regularly and reassure her that she was my priority. She seemed relieved when I told her Emily wouldn't be staying with us, but I could tell the whole situation was still weighing on her. "I just want things to go back to how they used to be," she said one day. "But I know they never will." She was right. No matter what I did, our family would never be the same. But I had to believe that we could find a way to move forward. Maybe not as the happy, united family we once were, but as something new. Something that worked for everyone. Once Emily moved into the small apartment my husband and I helped her secure, I thought things might settle down. It wasn't ideal, far from it, but it seemed like a step forward. At least she had a roof over her head and a place to regroup. We also paid for a couple of weeks of daycare for the kids, so she could start job hunting. It was the best we could do under the circumstances, especially since tensions were still high between her and the rest of the family. But things didn't go as smoothly as I'd hoped. Emily wasn't exactly grateful for the help. In fact, she seemed to resent it. She kept complaining about the size of the apartment, the lack of amenities, the area. Not unsafe, but definitely not luxurious. I tried to remind her that it was temporary, that she needed to focus on rebuilding her life, but she wasn't having it. "I can't live like this, Mom," she said during one of our phone calls. "I have 2 kids. They deserve better than this." I bit my tongue, wanting to say, "They deserve better than Jake, too." But here we are. Instead, I calmly reminded her that this was a starting point, not a permanent situation. "You're going to have to put in the work," I said. "This isn't going to fix itself overnight." The job hunt wasn't going well either. Emily hadn't worked in years, and her resume was practically empty. She applied to a few places, mostly retail and customer service jobs, but she didn't seem motivated to follow up. "They're not going to hire me," she said one day, almost as if she'd already decided it was a lost cause. It was frustrating to see her so defeated, especially knowing that she had no choice but to make it work. But no matter how much I tried to encourage her, it felt like my words were falling on deaf ears. Meanwhile, the rest of the family was still reeling from her sudden reappearance. Word had spread that Emily was back in town and staying in an apartment we'd helped her find. Some of my siblings called to voice their opinions, most of them negative. "After what she did to Sarah, you're still helping her?" one of them said. "You're enabling her, you know that, right?" I hated hearing it, but I understood where they were coming from. From the outside, it probably looked like I was rewarding Emily's bad behavior, but I couldn't bring myself to turn my back on her entirely, especially when there were 2 innocent kids involved. I had to remind myself that helping her didn't mean I condoned her actions. It just meant I wasn't willing to let her hit rock bottom with no safety net. As for Sarah, she was keeping her distance. We hadn't told her the full details of how we were helping Emily, only that Emily wasn't staying with us. I didn't want to burden her with more than she needed to know, but I also didn't want her to feel blindsided if she ran into Emily somewhere. So one day, I brought it up gently. "Emily's staying in an apartment across town," I said. "We helped her with the first month's rent, but she's on her own after that." Sarah nodded, her face unreadable. "I figured you'd do something like that," she said. "It's fine. I just don't want to be involved." Her response was calm, but it felt like there was an undercurrent of hurt. I knew she was trying to be understanding, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was putting a strain on our relationship. Then there was Alex. He was furious when he found out we were helping Emily at all. "Why are you bending over backward for her after everything she's done?" he asked one night. "She doesn't deserve it." I tried to explain that it wasn't about what Emily deserved. It was about doing what I felt was right. "Her kids are innocent in all of this," I said. "They need stability, and if we can help provide that, then I think we should." But Alex wasn't convinced. "You're just letting her manipulate you," he said. "She's never going to change if you keep bailing her out." His words stung because deep down, I knew there was some truth to them. But what was the alternative? Letting Emily sink completely? I wasn't sure I could live with that. Emily's struggles began to take a toll on her emotionally. She called me one night in tears, saying she felt like a failure. "I ruined everything," she said. "My marriage, my relationship with Sarah, my whole life. I don't even know who I am anymore. It was the first time she'd shown any real self-awareness, and it caught me off guard. For a moment, I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe this was her turning point, but that hope was short-lived. The next time I spoke to her, she was back to blaming everyone but herself. If Jake hadn't treated me like garbage, I wouldn't be in this mess, she said. And if Sarah had just forgiven me, maybe things wouldn't be so bad. It was like she couldn't decide whether to take responsibility or play the victim. It was exhausting. At the same time, I was struggling to maintain my own sanity. Between managing Emily's situation, supporting Sarah, and dealing with the fallout from the rest of the family, I felt like I was constantly walking on eggshells. I started to question whether I was making the right choices or just digging myself into a deeper hole. The breaking point came when Emily showed up at our house unexpectedly one evening. She looked tired and frazzled, the kids clinging to her legs. "I need to stay here just for a few nights," she said. My heart sank. "Emily, we've been over this," I said. "You can't stay here. It's not fair to Sarah." Her face crumpled and she started crying. "I don't know what else to do," she said. "I'm trying, Mom, but nothing's working. I feel like I'm drowning." I felt an overwhelming wave of guilt, but I held firm. "We'll help you find more resources," I said, "but you can't stay here." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, wondering if I'd made the right call. I wanted to believe that tough love was the answer, but part of me worried that I was just pushing Emily further away. At the same time, I couldn't ignore the damage it would do to Sarah if I let Emily move back in. It felt like no matter what I did, I was failing one of my daughters. After that night, when Emily showed up at our house begging to stay, things changed. I could feel the shift, not just with her, but within myself. The guilt that had been weighing on me for weeks didn't go away, but it transformed into something else. Resolve, maybe. I realized I couldn't keep trying to fix everything, to hold together a family that was already fractured. Some things, I decided, had to be left to time. The first step was enforcing boundaries. It wasn't easy. Emily called almost daily, asking for help with this or that. Sometimes it was money. Sometimes it was advice. Sometimes it was just someone to vent to. But every call left me emotionally drained. I had to start saying no. "Emily, you need to figure this out," I told her during one particularly tense phone call. "We've done everything we can to help you get back on your feet. Now it's your turn." She didn't take it well. "So, that's it?" she said. "You're just giving up on me?" I told her it wasn't about giving up. It was about giving her the chance to stand on her own. She hung up on me, and for a while we didn't speak. During that silence, I focused my energy on rebuilding my relationship with Sarah. She'd been distant ever since Emily re-entered the picture, and I couldn't blame her. I had been so caught up in managing Emily's crisis that I hadn't given enough attention to Sarah's feelings. One evening, I invited her over for dinner, just the two of us. I wanted to create a safe space where she could speak freely. At first, the conversation was light: work, hobbies, her friends. But eventually, the topic shifted to Emily. "I don't know how you do it, Mom," Sarah said. "After everything she's done, I don't think I'd be able to look at her, let alone help her." Her words weren't bitter. They were honest. "She hurt me in ways I can't even explain. And sometimes I feel like she still doesn't get it." I nodded, letting her vent. "You're right," I said. "She doesn't get it, not fully. And I don't know if she ever will. But I also know she's my daughter. And as much as she's hurt you, and me, I can't just walk away from her." Sarah sighed. "I get it. I don't like it, but I get it." That conversation marked a turning point for us. While things weren't perfect, it felt like a step toward healing. I promised her I would always prioritize her mental health, and that I wouldn't let Emily's presence disrupt the progress she'd made. It was a promise I intended to keep. Meanwhile, Emily was struggling. The reality of single motherhood had hit her hard, and without Jake's financial support, she was barely scraping by. She eventually found a part-time job at a local grocery store, but it wasn't enough to cover all her expenses. She called me one evening, crying about how hard it was. "I feel like a failure," she said. "I don't know how I'm supposed to do this." I wanted to tell her that this was the consequence of her choices, but I held back. Instead, I reminded her of the resources I'd given her: programs for single mothers, legal aid for her divorce, even therapy services. "You have tools, Emily," I said. "You just need to use them." But her pride got in the way. She didn't want to ask for help from anyone but me, and I wasn't willing to be her crutch anymore. It was tough love, but it was necessary. Slowly, she started taking more responsibility. It wasn't a perfect transformation. There were setbacks, moments where she lashed out or fell into old patterns. But it was progress. Alex, on the other hand, had completely cut ties with Emily. He refused to answer her calls or even acknowledge her existence. "I don't have time for her drama," he told me when I asked if he'd consider reaching out. She made her bed. Now she has to lie in it. While I didn't agree with his approach, I respected his decision. Everyone had their own way of coping, and this was his. As for the extended family, most of them stayed distant from Emily as well. Some openly voiced their disapproval of her actions, while others simply avoided her altogether. One of my sisters, who had been close to Emily growing up, told me, "I love her, but I can't support what she did to Sarah. Maybe someday, but not now." It was a sentiment I heard often, and while it hurt, I understood it. Months turned into a year, and the dust started to settle. Emily eventually moved into a slightly bigger apartment after picking up a second job. She seemed more stable, though the cracks were still there. She didn't talk about Jake much anymore, except to say that the divorce was finalized and he'd moved out of state. "Good riddance," she said when she told me. I could tell there was still a lot of anger there, but at least she was starting to move on. Sarah, meanwhile, was thriving. She had a new job she loved, a supportive group of friends, and even started dating someone new, a kind, patient man who treated her the way she deserved to be treated. When she introduced him to me and my husband, I saw something in her I hadn't seen in years: hope. It was a reminder that healing was possible, even after the deepest wounds. As for me, I've learned to accept that my family will never be what it once was. There's no fixing this, not in the way I initially hoped. But that doesn't mean we can't move forward. It just means we have to redefine what moving forward looks like. I still see Emily occasionally, mostly for the sake of the kids. They're beautiful, bright little souls who remind me that, despite all the pain, there's still joy to be found. Sarah hasn't spoken to Emily since the fallout, and I don't push her to. I've learned that healing looks different for everyone, and it's not my place to dictate what that should look like. In the end, I don't know if I made all the right choices. I'm sure there are things I could have handled better, things I should have said or done differently, but I did the best I could with the hand I was dealt, and I think that's all any of us can do. To anyone reading this who's struggling with family issues, know that it's okay to set boundaries. It's okay to prioritize your own mental health, and it's okay to let go of the idea that things will ever go back to the way they were. Sometimes moving forward means letting go, and that's okay too.